First off, you have to pardon my casual appearance. I just got back less than an hour ago from the Yukon, where we were sponsoring Hockey Day in Canada and making advanced plans for our drilling, which is set to commence next week on our Brewery Creek project. Before I get to that, telling you a little bit about that project, just to give you a little bit more information about the Yukon, other than you don't need suit and tie there very often. This graph I want to spend a minute on because it really explains the crux of why I think the Yukon has got an awful lot of life ahead of it. In fact, I'll predict 25 to 30 years. The blue line is based on the history of Nevada, which gold production alone in Nevada over the last decade or two would have made it the third largest gold producing country in the world if it were a country. So it's certainly one of the biggest, and I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Nevada's rank in the world. But what happens is after a geologic story is invented, that is a new model that comes to life. For instance, in 1966 when the Carlin Trend was discovered, it takes the geologists 2 or 3 years to really get it into a model that they can apply to the field. But once they do, the geologic sciences and the people on the ground have a very, very high success rate in finding the low-hanging fruit, or the easy deposits, if you will. And in fact, over a 25-year period in Nevada, over 55 major gold deposits were discovered in Nevada. Like I say, the culminating in being one of the top 3 gold producers in the world. Nevada, as you can see, is very far out here on the far end of this bell-shaped curve, some 48 years after the original discoveries in the new modern age. And in fact, there hasn't been a new discovery since 1989, which was the Midas deposit, although it looks like we may have had one just recently with Long Canyon, the subject of Newmont's recent buyout of Frontier. So even a mature district like Nevada will have an occasional success story. But the key here is to note the Yukon's very, very early level on the bell-shaped curve. And it's, if you'll notice, it's also about 10 years behind Alaska. Why is Alaska on here? Because Alaska and the Yukon are both situated on the Tintina Trend. This is the big trend that you saw in Greg's map earlier that goes straight through the east-west part of Alaska, all the way across. One of the biggest structures on Earth. It goes all the way through the Yukon and into northeasternmost British Columbia. Why is the Alaska so far ahead of the Yukon? Because of regulations and geopolitical factors. The rocks do not know where the boundary between Alaska and the Yukon are. It's all the same on one side to the other in terms of a geologic trend. There have been a number of things, by the way, during this time in Alaska, they found over 200 million ounces of gold, hard rock gold. As a bit of background, both Alaska and the Yukon both had an enormous wealth of placer gold, that is free gold in the streams, typically followed up by prospectors that find the sources in the mountains. Well, there's still probably, 1,000 people in the Yukon making their living off of placer gold. So it's still very early on, even though there have been 100 years of discovery. Very little of that has been dedicated towards hard rock discovery. And I would argue that the real trend has only been kicked off within the last 3 years. So we're very early on in this boom, and we have another 20 to 30 years of success. And indeed, I think we have over 100 placers in the Yukon. Now we have sources found for 3 of them. That leaves an awful lot of fertile ground to be looking. And I think you're going to see it as the unparalleled success story in the world over the next few years. You've seen a version of this chart earlier, exploration and development. Just at this point, I'll highlight some of the reasons that the Yukon has opened up. One is First Nations land settlement. There are 14 First Nations in the Yukon. 11 of them have signed land claim accords, which sets out very clearly land tenure, so you know what land you're dealing with, you know what rules you're dealing with, and you know which group you're dealing with. Prior to that, there were overlapping land claims, and there was no clear-cut system for working up there. Another factor is devolution. The Yukon has achieved devolution from Ottawa in that all their natural resources are regulated and permitted at the local level. This is hugely important and cuts down on your permitting time and all of the intergovernmental workings by order of magnitude, probably. And in fact, you can get a mine permitted in the Yukon in approximately 3 years, which is very, very prospective in any first world jurisdiction. A couple of other major factors. Obviously, the gold going up is a nice background, but I'd argue that's going up everywhere, and this is one of the top 3 jurisdictions in the world right now. So I think that you've got some very special factors here. Reworking of the Quartz Mining Act was key here. Up until 3 years ago, there was a very onerous tax or royalty imposed, which was essentially, it reached upwards of 50% at the upper end, which is certainly not attractive to the mining industry. Another factor, which seems relatively minor, has really opened up the door to this giant claim staking episode, and that was when you do your assessment work on acquiring claims, you do $100 a year of work on each claim to hold it. Well, you were only allowed to group 12 claims in one group in the past. Now it's 749. So you can effectively hold 749 claims by working on one claim. So that has greatly increased the amount of exploration in the Yukon. And prior to that, it had really kept the big companies from doing much work up there. And now you're seeing Kinross obviously come in, but all the other majors are certainly circling. A little bit about our company. You can see the market cap there. We've got 109 million shares. This does give effect to our bought deal financing we announced last week, which put about 23 million in the bank. So currently we're at 26 million with no debt. And major shareholders there, the Dundee Group, Sprott Asset, US Global, and Front Street, along with myself. Our objectives in the Yukon are to become the leading explorer and developer in the Yukon. We aren't trying to build a company to be taken over after a single success or even after a series of successes. There's nothing wrong with that vision. In fact, it's a very profitable one. But our vision is to build the next Kinross-sized company. We think you can clearly do that with the opportunity that's present in the Yukon. Granted, it's going to take more than a year or two. But our long-term plan is to fill that role. To that point, we have a series of properties, both advanced pipeline projects as well as exploration. And we're up around probably closer to 3,000 square kilometers under claim now. We've staked about 1,600 claims so far this year, since January 1st, and we have 5 crews out in the field now. Incidentally, right now there's a shortage of almost everything in the Yukon. We kind of kicked it off during Roundup when we bought all 70,000 mining claim tags from the recorder, which created a bit of a ruckus. And it took them a while because, of course, you can't stake without claim staking tags. And anyway, they replaced those shortly. So now the biggest news is there are no nails in the Yukon, so you can't nail the tags to the post. Next time it'll probably be no post, but there's always a shortage of something up there because of the frenzy that's going on. We aren't even the biggest claim stakers right now, and we have 5 crews going, so just something to be aware of. We are Yukon-based. We have a very strong presence there. We have over 20 geologists on staff for our efforts this year. Corco, leading up the teams, a Yukon geologist with a great deal of experience up there, led our activities last year. Mike Berkey, who is a recent recruit, he ran the Mineral Services Division of the Yukon Geologic Survey for the past 20 years and has seen just about every rock in the Yukon, is responsible for the creation of their database, and it was quite a coup for us to attract him. And he will be leading our efforts this year. We have our own senior structural geologist as well as a whole complement of project geologists. We have a very strong First Nations relations department, which I think is a real key to working in the Yukon. You simply must dedicate some real resources towards bringing along the community with you when you make these advances in mining. And to that end, Janet Sheriff, my wife, is our First Nations Relations Vice President. Sam Wallingham's the community liaison. Pierce McDonald, former Yukon Premier, is on our board, along with Blair Shaletto, who's a First Nations member of the Nacho-Nyack Dun. And I'm a resident of the Yukon as well. This kind of gives you an idea of how we view our company. At the bottom, you see royalty revenue from Nevada. We have a large package of royalty interest in Nevada that's projected to produce something in the order of $10 million when you look out 3 years from now, principally from Barrick operations. Right now, we're only getting about $1 million a year in production revenue, but that's slated to escalate with a couple of projects that are already permitted and in the production timeline. And then we have a large property of exploration-based projects called the Selwyn Basin District. This is an extension of the Rakla, where the Rao deposit is based, of ATAC. And then we have pipeline projects, which are somewhere in between grassroots exploration and advanced projects where we actually have identified the beginnings of resources. And then the projects above that, Gold Dome is quite frankly too big for us to operate ourselves, so we've got a number of majors that have signed confidentiality agreements, which will be looking for a carried joint venture going forward. We have a 30 square kilometer soil anomaly, biggest one in the entire Tintina terrain. And we drilled 100 holes, 95 of which have mineralization, but we just haven't found the guts of it. And it would take probably a $10 to $15 million a year budget to adequately address the size of that project. So we've put it on a joint venture arrangement, and we'll be looking to sign something up in the next few months on that. Harlan is our newest project, just recently acquired under joint venture from Alexco, who you'll hear from shortly. A drill-ready project that's been sitting there for, I think, about 8 years in the Yukon with some very nice numbers, 1,500 meter by 700 meter zone, just ready to be drilled. And then Brewery Creek, which was a producing mine up until 2002. It was the first open pit heap leach, also joint ventured from Alexco. We made a new discovery there in December, a couple of holes with 50 meters of about 3 grams. We will begin drilling on that within the next week or two. The other discovery this year was at Brewery Creek, which you see down here to the southeastern part of the map. Brewery Creek, we had a couple of holes that were measuring something on the order of 150 to 170 meters of 1.5 to 2 grams. We'll also begin drilling on that soon. In fact, our ability to drill in the winter, notwithstanding the rather adverse conditions, is made possible by road access. And you can see some of the known deposits, the Rao Tiger, the Osiris, Freegold Mountain down on the bottom. Our properties are primarily, at least our advanced ones, are all road accessible, and that gives us a huge advantage. Brewery Creek, having been a former producer, there's an all-weather building on site. Here again, a major advantage in terms of being able to work year-round. And Brewery Creek may be the only deposit in the Yukon where we may actually have to move a power line because we've got one going directly overhead right across the deposit. So we're looking to have a 43101 out on both of those this year. Brewery Creek has an existing 43101 of approximately 300,000 ounces. Since that time, we've drilled roughly 100 holes, and we'll have another 130 drilled by the end of March, April, somewhere in there, at which time we'll roll right into a 43101 update. Feasibility study should be commissioned shortly thereafter, assuming that we hit our target of about 600,000 ounces. And we should start looking at even a build out in late 2012 on Brewery Creek for a relatively modest 50 to 60,000 ounce a year producer. That's assuming everything goes well, of course. Clear Creek is our other project that we'll be spending a lion's share of our funding on this year. And that one we had a number of drills working on last year. We'll have 3 drills on it this year. It is road accessible, but we aren't operating it in the winter because it's 42 kilometers of unimproved dirt road from the highway. Assuming that we do well this year, and we certainly think we will, we've got 20 square kilometers of mineralized material there, giant sheeted vein zones that run 2 to 3 kilometers in strike length and 100 to 200 meters in width. Certainly not the entire, every inch of the 20 kilometers is mineralized, but we have these big through-going shear zones that are very attractive, and we put 42 holes into it last year and had some very, very good results. I think 25 25 meters of 2 and 3 grams in 2 or 3 of the holes were the highlights there. We had undersized drill rigs, so we're bringing in much bigger equipment this year and hope to have a 43101 out on that by the end of the year as well. So we will have 3 43101s out during the course of this year. We're spending something on the order of $12 to $13 million in direct exploration expenditures there. And we have a very healthy non-core asset monetization program, which this year saw the launch of Silver Predator, which brought in a very healthy return for the company on an ongoing basis. And I think you'll see that on our Nevada gold projects as well, notwithstanding the royalties. There's a disclaimer there, and be glad to entertain any other questions after this, or you can come see us at the booth 29. Thank you.